Hello, early American literature friends. This is a short guide through the basics of the research paper for this course, what I'm going to be grading for, the basics that I'm going to be looking for in your research paper. It's almost like I've got this first document here under the research paper guidelines and information, and what I hope it is for you is a checklist that you look at this and can look at this list and know what you need for your research paper. And then when you finish your research paper, you can go down this list and check everything off, and you'll know that you've done it correctly because you're checking everything off on this list. So I'm going to start by going through this list. Research paper checklist. The research paper for this course should be between 900 and 1200 words, somewhere in that range. 900 is the very low end that you've just gotten. You've covered the basics of your topic. That gives you a good range, 300 words though, to do your work in if you feel like you need more detail about some particular aspect. The research paper should have an effective topic-specific title. That means some title that's about your topic and some point that you want to make about it, or some interesting aspect of it, or your perspective on it, but some interesting, unique to your perspective title. The research paper should have a first introductory paragraph that introduces the topic that the paper will cover and also presents a well-defined thesis statement that clearly articulates the purpose of the paper. So the first paragraph needs to do two things. It needs to introduce your topic, so tell me what the paper is going to be about in general language, 2, 3, 4 sentences. What that's really asking you to do is give me some basic context, set the scene for your topic. And then once you've got that context, you need the thesis, which tells me what points you're going to prove about your topic. So you introduce the topic just a little bit and then tell me what you're going to prove about it too. So you're not just going to talk about the topic, you're going to prove some point about it. It doesn't have to be some earth-shattering point. It doesn't have to be you don't have to blow my mind. Just instead of just talking and talking and talking, prove something to me. And what you should do in the paper is use the research to develop and support and illustrate and prove that point. So tell me in that first paragraph what point you're going to prove, and then let the rest of the paper use the research to help you prove it. That leads to the next point, which is the research paper should feature at least 2 distinct professional or scholarly sources cited in the body of the paper, either directly, because you're quoting things, so that's how you're getting your sources into your paper. The easiest way to get your sources into your paper, I would say, is to just quote at least 2 sources. Use quotes. Often you will be writing a paper and you're like, this person has said this better than I could ever say it. We'll just take a sentence or 2 or 3 of theirs, plug it in, and then respond to it or elaborate on it or build on it or something like that. But that's when you're directly using a source in your paper, you're quoting it. Or you can also indirectly use sources by summarizing what a source says or by paraphrasing what they said, putting it into your own words. The paper should reflect clear integration of the research with the student's own writing and ideas. So even if you quote, let the writing kind of flow together. Don't make it choppy and there's these hard breaks between your own language and the quotes. And the outside sources should be used to either introduce concepts and ideas, so you use a source to bring something up and then you elaborate and develop on it, or to support and provide evidence for the student's ideas and claims. So you make a claim or a point and then bring in the evidence to agree with you and corroborate what you're saying. The research paper should be organized into paragraphs. Obviously, in a paper that's 900 to 1200 words, you're going to need at least 5 paragraphs, maybe more, but organize it into paragraphs with a beginning, like I said, a beginning paragraph, some body paragraphs, and then at least a short conclusion. Should have a works cited list at the end of the paper. At the end of the paper, this doesn't need to be a separate page, but skip a few spaces at the end of your paper, jump down and give me works cited, and then list the works that you have cited in the paper. So that your in-text citations link to and match to the works cited list in the end of the paper. And that leads me, so there's your rubric. That leads me to the next main point that I want to make about this. When you do this, your research paper needs to have 2 important components to it. You need parenthetical in-text citations anytime you use a source in the paper. And I'm going to try to pull that up if I can find it. Let's see. because this is an important key component here. Here we go. Your research paper needs to definitely have at least two aspects of it, and those two aspects are the in-text citations. And for MLA format, in-text citation means parenthetical in-text citation. Anytime you write a sentence that you're using a source in, whether it's quoting, summarizing, or paraphrasing, you need an in-text citation. In this case, they've got Dan Hoff and then 5. This is a book, so they're telling you it's Dan Hoff, page 5. You need that piece, that in-text citation. So you'll need in-text citations for at least 2 different sources to show that you're using those sources in your paper. And you can see this person has a number of in-text citations just in this paragraph. They've got Dan Hoff 5, they've got Dan Hoff 7, they've got Hurt, page 127. So you need those in-text citations. Part of what I'm grading for on this research paper is you citing your sources in text, those in-text citations that show where you're using your sources. Then you need a works cited list. Works cited, and you can see, you can scroll down here, they've got Dan Hoff in parentheses in their paper, and the first word of the citation is Dan Hoff. Dan Hoff links to Dan Hoff in the text, links to Dan Hoff in the works cited. And that's what's supposed to happen. Whatever the first word is of your citation in your works cited, that's the word that you should put in parentheses in the in-text citation, so that the in-text citation leads me down to the works cited list and connects Dan Hoff to Dan Hoff, or Baker to Baker, or Damari to Damari. So whatever the first word of that that citation is in the works cited list, that's what you put in the in-text citation. So that's part of what I'm grading for in this research paper, is you having those in-text citations and showing me that you're using the research and which sources you're using, and that in-text citation leads me down to whatever source you're citing in your works cited list. There's a couple of resources down at the bottom of the research paper guidelines and information. The Purdue OWL Research and Documentation Guide, if you jump over to it, they show you MLA general format, how to make an in-text citation, the basics of that, if you're struggling with like what to put in parentheses, like what I just talked about. But they also have, for making your list of works cited, they have basic format, books, periodicals, that'd be newspapers, magazines, things like that, electronic sources, web sources, which many of y'all are going to be using, other common sources like films, podcasts, things like that, additional resources. The basic format for a works cited, though, in MLA is author comes first if you have one, title of the article or the chapter or the short piece, in this case executive on a mission saving the planet, so that's the title of an article, and then the publication that it was published in, the container for it, in this case is the New York Times. So here's an article from the New York Times, author, article, publication, you get a date, 22 May 2007, then you get a web link here, and then access 29 May 2019. That's the basic format for all MLA citations. They want you to plug in, you start with the author, title of the text, the title of the container, if it was in a bigger container, a date, a publication date. And many times for publication date, all you'll have is a copyright date. So that's the last time that the publication has been updated. So if you see something that says copyright 2023, well, that's your date. Web address, and then access 29, and then accessed, whatever day you accessed it and looked at it. That's the basic format for all MLA works cited. And if you just keep that in mind as you're trying to make your works cited list, you'll be in good shape. And again, if you're trying to figure out what you should put in parentheses for your in-text citations, it's going to be like the first word of the works cited: Dean, Ebert, Gowdy, Harris, and inconvenient. This doesn't have an author, so your first word here would be inconvenient, first unique word there. There's also a link to the Georgia Highlands MLA 9 Resource Center. It will show you how to cite. It will show you how to format your paper in Word or Google Docs. It will show you how to format your works cited list. It'll show you how to do in-text citations, including how to paraphrase and quote. It will show you citation examples, same as the Purdue OWL. They've got a whole list of things like books, government publications, journal and magazine articles, images. They'll show you how to cite anything you need to. Both of those are linked down here at the bottom under our research paper guidelines and information. I want to go over the 2 research paper options, and then I'll be done with this. If you look under the research paper option number 1 option here, you can see there's several of those. There's 5 of these. The first one asks you to write about John Brown. John Brown was perhaps the most controversial figure in all of the 1800s. He was an anti-slavery activist he was always anti-slavery because of his religious upbringing. But as he got older, and especially after the 1850s, he believed in the violent overthrow of the system of slavery. He believed that slavery needed to be ended by any means necessary as immediately as possible. He participated in what is now called Bleeding Kansas, these attacks on when Kansas was becoming a state. Both pro and anti-slavery people flooded the state of Kansas to try to vote for whether Kansas should be free or a slave state. And John Brown participated in some violent activities out there. And then later, he participated in a raid on Harper's Ferry in what is now West Virginia, the largest government armory at that time, where a lot of weapons and ammunition were stored. And he tried to take over Harper's Ferry, arm slaves, and create this armed uprising to overthrow slavery. He was eventually captured at Harper's Ferry and hanged for that activity. So this asks you to write about John Brown and his activism and his career as an anti-slavery activist. There is another option that asks you to write about a particular incident in the history of slavery. So it's not asking you to write about the 300-year history of slavery. You couldn't write a short paper about that, but it's asking you to pick a small incident and write about it and think about why it's important. Like the Dred Scott case of 1857, in which Dred Scott was found that he could not be free. Nat Turner's 1831 slave insurrection in Virginia, probably the most famous slave uprising in United States history. The Amistad Revolt, which is when a group of slaves from Africa overthrew the people on the ship as they were being transported. The 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana. There's a wide variety of significant incidents in the history of slavery and resistance to slavery, both from free people and from enslaved people. So pick one of those incidents and write about it. The third choice, the third option gives you some options of some films to write about that deal with this period, the period that our class covers, from like 1600 to the Civil War, 1860. Including The Last of the Mohicans, The Patriot, Pocahontas, The New World, Amistad. It asks you to pick one of those films and analyze the way that it's thinking about this particular time period and the aspects it's covering, like colonialism, the noble savage, European and Native interactions, slave narratives, typology, biblical imagery, things like that. The fourth option asks you to write about the Salem witch trials, and not just the Salem witch trials as a whole, but to pick one important participant, like a judge or a witch who was executed or something like that, and write about that incident. And then the fifth option asks you to write about Roanoke, which is often referred to as the Lost Colony. It was the first attempt to build a colony in the New World. It occurred in what is now North Carolina, but the colony failed, and the people who were left there disappeared, and there is this mystery that has surrounded what happened to the people at Roanoke. So this option asks you to sort of explain that situation, explain that first lost colony. The second option, research paper option 2, for this option, students will write a research paper that explains a particular period, era, genre, mode of American writing. And once that period or mode is explained, so you're going to talk about the Enlightenment or Romanticism or slave narratives or Transcendentalism. You're going to explain that in a few hundred words. You should then explore and analyze how a particular text and writer exemplifies, demonstrates, or epitomizes that genre. So you're going to explain the genre, and then you're going to explain how a text or a writer fits under that umbrella of that genre. It needs to be 900 to 1100 words. It should feature 2 or 3 sources, beyond the primary text. So like if you're writing about a text and saying, you know, saying that Harriet Jacobs is an example of slave narrative, you'll write about her text. You'll need 2 or 3 sources beyond incidents in the life of a slave girl. As with all formal papers, it should feature a title, beginning and end, list of works cited, thesis statement, stuff we've already talked about. So you need 2 or 3 sources for this at least, and then it gives you a list of the genres and movements. The Enlightenment, which goes from the mid 1600s to the late 1700s, and you can see the right. And it also gives you a list of writers from our readings that would fit in these different things. Like slave narrative, for us, slave narrative is Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs. Gothic fiction would be Edgar Allan Poe. Dystopia with Nathaniel Hawthorne, and you can you could explain dystopia as a genre of literature, and then explain how Hawthorne and Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown is a dystopian piece of literature because of the sort of nightmarish quality of it. So this one asks you, as I said, to explain a movement or a genre or a particular time period or particular mode of writing, and then explain how the writer and or the written text fits into and demonstrates or illustrates that genre. This is often when students write this paper, there's like they're writing 2 halves. That first half that explains the genre, and then the second half that explains how the writer and the text fits under that umbrella of the genre. I hope this is a helpful guide to you, both for what research option you want to pick here and the basics of how that should look and be formatted and structured and those kinds of things. But as always, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch, and I'll be happy to help you however I can.